What you're seeing right now at this very moment is not reality. It's only a tiny, almost pathetic slice of what actually exists around your body, less than 1%. And the worst part, you've been trained since childhood to believe that this slice is everything, that what your eyes capture, what your ears hear, what your skin feels, is the whole world. It isn't. It never was. And if you keep operating within that slice, you'll spend the next 20, 30, 40 years of your life believing you're awake when, in truth, you're only in a more organized version of sleep. One man understood this deeply. A scientist of Czech origin, a biomedical engineer, an inventor of instruments still used to this day in hospitals worldwide. His name is Itzhak Bentov, and what he discovered about human consciousness, about the invisible mechanics that build what you call reality, is so unsettling that, for many, his sudden death in a plane crash in 1979 remains to this day surrounded by questions no one wanted to answer. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what he discovered, and by the end of this video, you won't be able to look at your own mind the same way anymore. Because the mistake most people make is not spiritual, it's biological, and it can be reversed. Bentov started from a premise that, to the average brain, seems absurd. The evolution of the human species has not ended, and, most importantly, it was never primarily physical. We stopped expecting physical changes because, at a certain point in history, the ape straightened its spine, grew its prefrontal cortex, learned to use symbolic language, and nature seemed to say, "There, that's fine, it works." But what Bentov argued was something else. He saw evolution as a silent, almost invisible curve that keeps shifting not into the body but into consciousness. In each generation, a small percentage of the species begins to be born with a slightly different nervous system, slightly more sensitive, slightly more open to picking up frequencies that the average mind doesn't even suspect exist. It's not mysticism, it's subtle biology. It's as if within humanity's genetic river there were secondary, faster currents carrying some people toward a state of perception that the rest will take centuries to reach. And that's why, in a room with 100 ordinary people, there's always one who feels things the other 99 swear don't exist. It's not madness. It's not spiritual vanity. It's evolution in motion. And Bentov asserted, with the coldness of someone who spent decades measuring micro-vibrations of the human body with instruments he himself built, that this expansion of consciousness is the species' next leap. We're not going to grow wings, we're going to gain perception. But perception, contrary to what cheap self-help taught you, is not a choice. It is an instrument. And the standard human instrument, the body you inhabit at this moment, was designed to capture a ridiculously narrow band of reality. Your eyes see only a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Your ears pick up a tiny window of sound frequencies. Your sense of touch responds only to certain types of pressure and temperature. Everything that exists outside that range, and Bentov was categorical about this, exists just as much as what lies within it. You simply lack the apparatus to detect it. It is like being inside a radio permanently tuned to a single station, believing that is the only music playing on the air. But the air is full of waves of information, of fields that pass through your body right now at this very instant, and you feel none of it. Not because they are not there, but because the receiver is limited. And this is where things get interesting, because Bentov claimed that the evolution of consciousness is exactly that, a gradual widening, generation after generation, of that opening of perception. The window through which we look at the real is expanding, slowly, but it is. And whoever manages to accelerate that expansion within their own lifetime through specific practices of meditation and internal coherence begins to perceive layers of reality that most people only suspect in dreams. If you have made it this far, and you are feeling that strange thing in your chest, that silent recognition that there is something greater that you always knew but never managed to name, write in the comments the phrase, "I recognize." Just those 3 words. Because the first step to widening the window is admitting publicly that it exists. And in the first pinned comment of this video, I left a specific resource, the same one I use to guide whoever wants to start this expansion in a practical way, without relying on theory, and without relying on luck. If this is your moment, you already know what to do. If it is not yet, that is fine too. Go back to the video, because what comes next explains exactly why some people manage to see the invisible, while others live their entire lives inside the box. There is a line, and that line is exceedingly thin, between what society calls genius and what society calls madness. Bentov spent years investigating that boundary, and he reached a conclusion that psychiatry manuals avoid with an almost religious care. The conclusion is this: in many cases, what we classify as a psychotic episode, hallucination, mystical delirium, may not be illness. It may be a nervous system that opened too quickly, unprepared, to a band of reality it does not yet know how to process. It is like connecting a fragile circuit, designed for 110 volts, straight into a 2000-volt outlet. The information is correct, the voltage is real, but the receiver burns out. And when the receiver burns out, what remains is a human being trying to describe, with the limited language of everyday life, experiences that simply do not fit into the words he learned. Is that different from illness? Bentov would say yes. Bentov would say that modern psychiatry, in its obsession with standardizing behavior, ended up pushing into the label of pathology experiences that, in other eras, would have been interpreted as initiation, as awakening, as contact. This does not mean, and it is important to underline, that every strange experience is mystical. There is real psychic suffering, there is mental pain that needs care, and no one here is romanticizing that. What Bentov pointed out is that our culture has lost the capacity to differentiate. It lost the map, and when you lose the map, anything that escapes the square seems like a threat. A medieval saint who had his visions today, right in the middle of the street of any big city, would probably be medicated before the end of the week. An ancient prophet with the same experience would be diagnosed before finishing his first sentence, not because his experience was false, but because contemporary society decided that only what fits within the common band of perception is real, and anything that exceeds that band receives a clinical name and a pill. And it is impossible not to think of specific historical episodes when you follow this line of reasoning. Bentov spoke, for example, of the classic episode of St. Paul on the road to Damascus, a man who was going to persecute Christians, who was proud, violent, dogmatic, and who, in the middle of a dusty road, falls from his horse after being struck by a light that no one around seems to have seen with the same intensity. He goes blind for 3 days. Then he regains his sight, but he regains it seeing something else. He regains it seeing a reality that reorganizes his entire life. If that experience happened today, with cameras, witnesses, and medical records, what would the manual say? They would probably speak of acute dissociative crisis with psychotic symptoms, conversion disorder, some episode of extreme stress with a hallucinatory component. Pick the label. They all look elegant. They all look scientific. None of them actually explains what happened. Because the explanation, from Bentov's point of view, is another. The nervous system of that man, under extreme emotional and spiritual pressure, opened for an instant to a band of reality he had not been able to capture until then. And the contact was so intense that it completely reorganized his personality. We are not talking about blind faith. We are talking about subtle mechanics. There is a difference between believing in miracle and understanding that certain phenomena that our species has called miracle for 2,000 years may have a biological explanation even more frightening than the magic that religion proposes. Because if the experience is real, if it can be induced, if it can be trained, then the line that separates the prophet from the sick man, the enlightened from the afflicted, the seer from the delusional, is a line that our society drew lazily, and any one of us under the right conditions could cross that line in either direction. And it's from this point that Bentov's theory starts to become truly unsettling for anyone raised within ordinary materialism. Because he asserted, without hedging, that what truly evolves within the human species is not the physical body. The body, for him, is an instrument, a vehicle, a highly sophisticated biological machine, yes, but disposable. The body is born, grows, reproduces, falls ill, dies, and disappears. It has always been this way, and it always will be. What evolves, what crosses time, what accumulates information, what actually learns is consciousness. It is what most of the world's spiritual traditions, long before neuroscience even existed, called the soul. Bentov didn't use that word for poetry. He used it with almost technical precision. For him, the soul would be a kind of vibrational structure that survives the death of the body and carries with it the refinement of the experiences that consciousness lived through while incarnate. Each life would be, within that logic, a laboratory session, an opportunity to collect data that will be taken silently into the next cycle. And that changes everything. Because if you operate believing that this life is the only one, that the body is you, that death is the end, all your choices become dominated by fear. Fear of losing, fear of making mistakes, fear of wasting time. But if you operate believing, and here we're not asking for faith, we're only asking for the possibility, that there is a continuity of consciousness, that what you refine here is not lost, then every decision takes on a completely different weight. You stop trying to survive, and you start trying to mature. You stop chasing immediate results, and you start building internal states that you might only reap long after leaving this body. It's an uncomfortable perspective. Precisely for that reason, it's so powerful. And if the soul exists, and if it evolves, where does it go? What is the final destination of that journey? Bentov proposed a layered model. He described different levels of existence, each vibrating at a higher frequency than the previous one, each representing a greater degree of integration between individual consciousness and what he called universal consciousness. At the first levels, the soul still perceives itself as separate. It has a name, a story, an identity, an ego. It is you, with all your preferences, your traumas, your quirks. At the intermediate levels, the perception of separation begins to thin. The soul remains itself, but it begins to feel that there is something around it, something always present, something with which it was never truly alone. And at the highest levels, that boundary dissolves. The drop understands it was always the ocean. The wave understands it was always the sea. Individual consciousness perceives itself as a momentary expression of a greater consciousness, without beginning, without end, without separation. This is not religious discourse. Bentov asserted this from the very behavior of brainwaves, from the very functioning of the human heart, from the very micro-vibrations he could measure in people in deep states of meditation. And he argued that this is the natural evolutionary destiny of the species. It is not an option reserved for a chosen few. It is a trajectory. Sooner or later, whether in one lifetime or 50, every consciousness walks toward that integration. The question that hangs in the air is, do you want to accelerate this journey, or do you want to let it happen in its own time, over lifetime after lifetime? Before I show you what Bentov proposed as a concrete method for this acceleration, leave one thing in the comments. If you understood that true evolution is not about your bank account but about your consciousness, write the phrase down there. I accelerate. 2 words, and check the pinned comment, because that's where the material I prepared specifically for those who reached this point in the video, understanding the weight of what is being said, is waiting. And the method exists. Bentov was emphatic on this point. There is a way to accelerate within a single lifetime the refinement of the nervous system that natural evolution would take centuries to produce. And that way has an ancient name, almost worn out from being so trivialized: meditation. But the meditation Bentov spoke of is not the exercise of emptying your head for 10 minutes using an app while your phone buzzes beside you. It is something else. It is sustained, daily, silent work, training the body to vibrate in coherence, aligning heartbeat, breath, brainwaves, and the body's electric field into a single stable pattern. When this happens, and Bentov measured this with instruments, the body begins to function as an antenna of extremely high precision. It stops being merely a receiver of the common band of reality and begins to pick up frequencies that were previously inaccessible. The window opens, and once open, it never fully closes again. You can be on the bus, in traffic, at the supermarket, and keep perceiving layers that to those on the outside remain invisible. This is the gift. This is the concrete promise. But Bentov was honest enough to also speak of the other side. He affirmed that even if you do absolutely nothing, even if you live your entire life ignoring this, evolution will happen. It is slow, impersonal, indifferent to your appetite or your haste. It will arrive. It's just that it may arrive in another life, or in another after that, or in one even further along. The technique is not what guarantees that you evolve. The technique is what guarantees you don't waste this life. It is what transforms this incarnation, this specific one with this name and this body, into a leap rather than a step. And now we arrive at the most delicate point of this video, because everything you have just heard was built by a man who died. Bentov died in May 1979 in a plane crash, days after finishing a book that would forever change the way certain scientific and spiritual circles came to understand human consciousness. Coincidence? Perhaps. A historical pattern involving researchers who got too close to certain subjects? Also perhaps. The fact is, his body left the stage. His work remained. And if his theory is right, and the evidence is growing that he was touching something important, then Bentov's consciousness did not end in that crash. It continued. Refined, more integrated, probably inserted into one of the highest levels of the model he himself described. This is not cheap emotional comfort. This is the logical consequence of his own theory applied to his own life. And if that is the case for him, it is the case for you too. Your consciousness does not end on the day your body stops. It continues. And what it takes from this life into the next is not your car, not your salary, not your resume. What it takes is the degree of internal coherence you manage to build. It is the refinement of your nervous system. It is the quality of the internal states you inhabited. And this is where responsibility becomes overwhelming, because you can close this video now, go back to the same old routine, let fatigue, bills, arguments, notifications absorb your field of attention for the next few weeks, and nothing will happen. Tomorrow morning your body will wake up and repeat the same emotional state as yesterday, as the day before, as last year. You will keep existing. Only you will keep existing within the same narrow band of reality you have always inhabited. And the years will pass. And one day this body will stop, and your consciousness will look back, and it will realize that it did, yes, have a chance. It did, yes, have a moment when someone explained the mechanics of the thing. It did, yes, have a video on some ordinary afternoon when the map was handed over, and that the answer was simply to do nothing. In the first pinned comment of this video is the material I prepared specifically for those who understood that this cannot be one of those times again. It is not for everyone. It is for those who made it this far. You already know if it is for you. Biology is waiting for your instruction. The nervous system is waiting for the new pattern. The window is ready to widen. The only thing still missing, and no video can do this in your place, is your decision. Decide.